All right, let's dive into a really fascinating case. Imagine a divorce where the real fireworks don't start until after the papers are filed. That's exactly what we're talking about today with A. Jayachandra versus Aneel Kaur. This case literally rewrote the rulebook on evidence in family law.
So here's a question for you. In a divorce trial, when does the story actually end? You'd think the court only cares about what happened before someone filed for divorce, right? But what happens when the conflict just explodes after that point? I mean, what if the most telling, most crucial behavior happens while the lawyers are already involved? Well, this case, A. Jayachandra versus Aneel Kaur, puts that question front and center.
Okay, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the marriage itself, then look at the pattern that emerged after the petition was filed. We'll get into the huge question this raised for the court, see how they landed on a principle of fairness, and finally, wrap up with the case's lasting impact. All right, Section 1, a marriage on trial. Let's dig into what started this whole thing. So let's get the facts straight. We're talking about A. Jayachandra versus Aneel Kaur, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of India and was decided back in 2004. The whole thing hinges on a specific piece of law, Section 13(1)(a) of the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. And that section is all about getting a divorce on the grounds of cruelty. The person who started all this, the appellant, was the husband, A. Jayachandra. And here's an interesting detail. Both he and his wife, Aneel Kaur, were medical professionals. He's the one who filed for divorce, and his claim was mental cruelty. That was the spark that lit the fuse.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, the post-petition pattern. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting. Because you see, the main drama in this story doesn't unfold before the court case, it happens after. So once the divorce petition was on the table, the respondent, Aneel Kaur, didn't just sit back. No, she launched a series of legal actions against her husband. And we're not talking about one little thing here. This was a clear sequence of events, a pattern that the Supreme Court would end up scrutinizing with a microscope.
Just look at this list. It's a masterclass in escalation. First, she files an injunction suit over their hospital practice rights. Okay. Then she starts proceedings to actually seize his hospital equipment. It gets even more intense. She sought to have him put in civil detention. And get this, even though she was a doctor with her own income, she filed for maintenance. To top it all off, she filed multiple legal petitions but used incorrect accresces. You see what's happening here? It's a clear escalating pattern. Now for Section 3, the court's crucial question. All of this behavior, it backed the Supreme Court into a corner. They had to face a huge, fundamental question about what even counts as evidence. And here's the dilemma in a nutshell. All of these hostile legal moves happened after the divorce petition was already filed. Normally, a court might just say, nope, that's irrelevant to the original claim. But in this case, the court saw something more. They saw a story unfolding in real time, a story of ongoing conflict that could be the key to the whole case. Which brings us to the million-dollar question. Can events that happen after a petition is filed be considered as evidence of cruelty? I mean, think about it. Should a court be allowed to look at things that happen once the legal battle is already underway? And can those actions be used to prove the original claim? Whatever the court decided here was going to be a huge deal. And here is the court's absolutely brilliant reasoning, right from the judgment itself. They said, if acts subsequent can be looked into to infer condemnation, acts subsequent can be taken note of to show a pattern in the behavior and conduct. What they're saying is simple yet so powerful. If we, as a court, are willing to look at positive things that happen after filing, like forgiveness, what lawyers call condemnation, to see if a marriage can be saved, then it's only fair that we also look at negative actions that show a destructive pattern. So let's move to Section 4, the principle of fairness. Because the court's logic here wasn't just about creating a new rule out of thin air. It was about something much more fundamental, bringing common sense and fairness right into the courtroom. And this is the legal principle that came out of it. The big takeaway. Subsequent acts can be considered to show a pattern of behavior and conduct in matrimonial cases alleging mental cruelty. The court made it crystal clear. In these kinds of cases, things that happen after the filing are absolutely admissible. They aren't just isolated incidents. They're pieces of a puzzle that can show the true, undeniable state of the relationship. The logic is just perfect. It's totally symmetrical. See, the law has always said it's okay for a court to look at good things that happen after filing, like reconciliation.
The Supreme Court basically said, well, that door has to swing both ways. If we're going to consider acts of peace, then we have to consider acts of war. It's all about balance and getting the full story, not just one side of it. So in the end, after looking at this whole pattern of hostility that happened after the petition, the Supreme Court reached a clear conclusion. These actions proved, beyond a doubt, that the marriage had irretrievably broken down. The fight didn't stop when the papers were filed. In fact, it got worse. And that, right there, proved the original claim of cruelty was valid.
And that brings us to our final section, an enduring legal precedent. What's the lasting impact of this ruling? Because this wasn't just about one couple's divorce. It was a decision that sent ripples throughout the entire legal system. Another important thing this case did was really nail down the definition of mental cruelty. The court made a huge point that this isn't some black and white rigid idea. What counts as cruelty is totally dependent on the context. You have to look at the couple's life, their social standing, their background, their environment. The real test is, would a reasonable person, in their exact shoes, be expected to just put up with that kind of behavior?
All right, for all you law students and legal pros out there, listen up. Here are the key takeaways you need to write down. Number 1, subsequent acts matter a lot. They can be the most crucial evidence you have. 2, mental cruelty is not one size fits all, it's all about context. 3, don't shy away from evidence from family and friends. The court says that's natural and should just be tested like any other evidence. And finally, number 4, a pattern of behavior is what really drives home the point that a marriage is beyond repair.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. A really practical question. Now that you know that everything your client does during the lawsuit can end up as evidence against them, how does that change the advice you give them from the very first meeting on day 1? It's a massive strategic shift, and it just goes to show how deeply this one case changed the game for family law.